welcome to the Active Travel Cafe for the 29th of April 2025. Thank you all for coming. And tonight we'll be hearing from Ian Walker, Professor Ian Walker at the University of Swansea, on motonormativity and the latest research he's been doing with Marco de Brömmelstroet. I may be corrected on that later. We've written some really interesting research which takes his original work on one stage further and looks at how environment of people and transport environment affects people's views on motor normativity and what kind of transport is normal. And then we'll be hearing from our very own Ranty Highwayman Mark Philpott on Dutch hills. We're looking forward to that. But first, as ever, we will start with locally sourced news. And has anyone got news from where they are, or national news that they think we should all hear about from the world of active travel? We'll start with Adam in Somerset.
Right. So we're having our combined authority mayoral elections coming up. So that's excitement. Unlike some of the other areas, it looks like it might be a green mayor, which is good, rather than a reform mayor, which is elsewhere. We'll see what happens there. But it's a very close. It's very balanced. So who knows what, you're only talking about 3 or 4% in between. What I wanted to raise was, although people are aware of the city region sustainable transport settlement that was done, which was 2022 to 2027. We do have a situation, I think, where I've seen a recruitment for a CRSTS program manager in WECA. So I suspect that the councils or combined authorities will be beginning to gear up for the next bid on that, which will be CRSTS 2027 to 2032. And based on the timescales of when the bids are submitted, you're talking about Q4 2026 by the time they're developed and put in. So I would probably say that if you're in a combined authority, you should probably start conversations with your council about how are they developing that bid and what's going to happen. Money, I don't know if the indicative money that was announced, I think it was 8.8 billion and then increased by another 5 billion from northern combined authorities, will still be the same when it comes around to that time. But you should start those conversations around walking, wheeling, cycling infrastructure and sort of bus integration.
Great. Thanks very much, Adam. Mark?
Hi, thanks. Two things, one past, one present. So 5 years last week was the 5th anniversary. People might have seen me saying this, 5th anniversary of the closure of Madeira Drive in Brighton. The picture is of me cycling on the closed Madeira Drive on the 20th of April 2020. And it was the first COVID-related traffic scheme in the country. So it's worth noting that it has been 5 years, and I would say what a 5 years, but there's a lot of things that happened, and that's why we're all here. So that's the commemoration, and your schemes, your local schemes, might be worth noting as well, because you'll have 5-year anniversaries coming up, popping up of lots of schemes, which people have probably forgotten about. On the better side of things, we had a very large critical mass on Sunday, with about 400 to 500 people on it, which I think is one of the biggest, possibly the biggest in the country. I don't know. Other places might want to compete on numbers, but we had a very, very active, very popular, and generally very successful. There was one incident with a driver trying to drive into a bunch of kids, which is very sad. Winchester had 630. Wow. Okay. Lose out to Hampshire. Sorry. Okay. Well, there we go. But anyway, it was really good and really great fun. So there we are.
Thanks very much, Mark. I have to say that the mighty metropolis of Haddenham had 399 riders on its critical mass last year. But there you go. You've done quite well to beat that. But they're campaigning for a greenway between Tame and Haddenham. So with a bit of luck, once the opposing counties of Oxfordshire and Buckinghamshire stop blaming each other for not having it, they'll get on and build it. Bob, how are we doing?
How are you? Hello, everybody. One of my occasional visits. Next month, there is a Landor conference, Landor as in Local Transport Today, Vision Zero and 20's Plenty conference in Liverpool, and I will be presenting for the Road Danger Reduction Forum, as will my colleague Brenda Pesh, and we'll be covering bicycle bingo, culture wars, what the difference between road danger reduction and road safety is, and floating bus stops between the two of us in about 10 very short sessions in the afternoon. Also, there'll be presentations on SUVs and vehicle weight research by Ruth Carlson, who's also an RDRF committee member, but speaking as an independent researcher. So that's on May the 15th. I'll stick a link in the chat.
Great. Those sessions Landor run are usually good. I know that Andrew Gant, who's the cabinet member for transport in Oxfordshire, is going, and the progress on 20 miles an hour in Oxfordshire has really been great. There's a very good model they've adopted, which is that the parish and town councils request it, and at last count I think 299 had, and about 8 hadn't. So it's been locally driven. The council made a funding pot of 8 million to do the whole county, except for Oxford itself, which was a separate programme, and that it's actually only cost about half that much money to do. So it's been a huge success. Of course, there are some voices against, but overall, it's just been terrifically successful. Great, Natalie.
Yeah, hi everyone. News from Southwest London. Over Easter, Hammersmith Bridge finally reopened to cyclists. And it is open. It is officially open. And as a cyclist, as a cargo cyclist, as an alternative cyclist, you can go over the bridge. It was quite funny watching the politicians tie themselves in knots to not announce the opening, but the opening did then get covered all the same. And it's just going strength to strength, and the pictures we're getting from people going across the bridge every day is just fantastic. It just is being used enormously. So hopefully over the next few months, courage will mean that conversations about it opening to cars will start to disappear quietly into the background. But yeah, so if you're ever in Southwest London, come and enjoy Hammersmith Bridge and its cycle route. Another event happening in here in this part of London is the Wandsworth Bridge Road Spring Fair, which is something that I personally organise. We close one of the main roads for a day on a Sunday. It's next Sunday, the 11th. And the main reason to doing it is to show the local population the world doesn't come to a stop when a main road is closed to cars. And it's transformed into a massive fair. We had 15,000 people come last year to it. We use it as a mechanism by which we get the council to publicise their plans for the main road, for the full regeneration and redesign of the road away from cars, because we insist that they have a presentation to give to the population. And it's also a fantastic result in as much as we can then say that we've had a consultation, we have shown the plans to 15,000 people. So it serves a double-edged sword of, one, forcing the council to actually draw up the plans of what they're going to do in the coming months, and two, be able to debunk that no one told us about it, because actually it was showcased by the council at the fair. So anyone who's in London, if you are in London on the 11th of May, come down to the Wandsworth Bridge Road to our spring fair. Thanks.
Great pitch. Okay, Beth.
Hi, I'm multitasking because I didn't realise I missed the time, and then I was like, oh right, active travel. If I missed this already, I just wanted to shout out a thanks to London Cycling Campaign for hosting us, and I actually met some participants of the active travel and they are real people as well. So, but also, and that was a great day. So if you've not been to their community days and you're interested and you think it might be helpful, I definitely recommend it in the future. But afraid to say, slightly better than that was the Global Bike Bus Summit. I didn't miss coverage of this at the start, did I? No,
no one's talked about that.
Oh, okay. Well, so you should all have FOMO because it was one of the most inspiring 2 days of my life. Absolutely incredible. Getting kids on bikes, as you all know from critical mass, is such a winner. And yeah, everyone needs bike buses, I think. And yeah, I was very inspired. And then I came home to a opening of our new Harbourside statue, where they've put a statue of Agatha Christie, where we should really have had some cycling infrastructure. Pretty sad. Opened by Jeremy Vine. But I can't get him to publicly talk about it. But I'm still working on that one.
Right.
So, yeah.
That's in Torquay.
As in Torquay, really busy road. Went from a dual carriageway to 2 lanes, and the cycle lane got scrapped. And it's over 16,000 cars a day, and it's double-decker buses and lorries, and yeah, it's not nice. But there we go. Yeah, win some, lose some.
Okay. Great. Thanks very much. Right, 2 more quick ones before we move on to Ian. H.
Me unmuted there, that's right.
Yep.
Yeah, catching up with Glasgow is now going out to re-tender for the bike scheme. Edinburgh's been looking at them. Leeds has now started to get them. Beryl seems to be quite a strong contender. I wonder whether we might do a roundup of what the contenders look like coming in from this and getting it right, because there seems to be a lot of issues there. And the other one that I'm looking at is the bikes on buses issue. Blackwall Tunnel has got a 24-hour bus service that should be carrying bikes. And there's a lot of problems with the Dartford crossing, where clause 25 of the bill says there must be provision to get bikes and pedestrians across the Dartford crossing. And there is a bus service that runs the X80, and I'm wondering whether we can leverage in active travel funding to support that bus carrying bikes, and then we would not have the problem of the hazardous loads escort vehicle carrying your bikes in the back of a Land Rover. So, you know, if we can get a bus service that's going Purfleet to Dartford across the crossing carrying bikes, that will actually resolve the problem.
Okay, thanks. So Mark Strong did a presentation on hire bikes, the different operators, a few months ago. That'd be worth looking up again. The question is whether it's moved on since then. He's shaking his head. So suggestion is to have a look at that one and reprieve it. There's someone in the chat notes that Beryl moved out of East Dorset, but maybe that's maybe Mark knows something about that. But if he does, he probably can't tell you because it's commercial. That's the way of these things.
No, I don't work for Beryl. I work alongside.
You still might know something that you can't say. But anyway, you drop things in the chat if you can, and maybe comment as to whether it's worth doing another session on the topic or not. And last one, Jill, then, from Stevenage.
Yeah, hi.
Right on the right, Jill.
Yeah, it was just when Beth mentioned Agatha Christie, I thought, oh, statues. Are sculptures a thing? We've got a sculpture, a beautiful sculpture that we're all very much in favour of, but being plonked right in the middle of a shared area of cycleway and pedestrian and bus station and station sort of built up area. It just seems really strange that they're just putting it there right in the middle. Anyway, it's also just a flag up to say we've put all about that on Blue Sky, because now we've eventually got round to being on Blue Sky. So Stevenage Cycle Campaign's on Blue Sky now, and find out about our statue there. Thanks to it was combined work. Ailey Murray came up to Stevenage, look at bluebells, and took the photos of me and Tina standing where the statue will be. So all thanks to Active Travel Cafe.
Brilliant. And I met lots of people at the London event, which was great. Thank you to the London Cycling Campaign team for putting that on. That was terrific. And extending it to more than just Londoners. And we in Oxfordshire, like many of you, or several of you, have got our elections coming up this week on Thursday, the County Council. There is a big difference between the parties that support active travel and the ones that don't, even though some of them the Conservatives used to, but now don't. Very clearly, they've changed over the last 5 years. And so the voting choices for any of us active travellers have become very, very clear, and we will find out on Friday or over the weekend how that has gone. I guess at the moment we're cautiously optimistic, but I'll come along next week and tell you how it's gone. Right, Ian, over to you. Looking forward to your presentation.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So yeah, I'll try and whiz through this quite quickly, and apologies if I sort of skip over any detail, but more than happy to answer questions. So some of you might know, especially Ed, who's just popped up since I was talking to him this morning about this, that we've been doing work for a few years now on the blind spots or the double standards that people seem to exhibit when it comes to cars. This problem of overlooking the negatives and excusing the problems. And so I just wanted to share some of the most recent work we've been doing on this, particularly looking at this idea that people suspend their usual values, their usual sense of right and wrong that they would use in any other circumstance when the topic of driving comes up. Because all of us in this call know how often it can feel like you're banging your head against a brick wall trying to make change. And you keep coming up against people who just struggle to imagine change or struggle to see the need for change in the first place. So, a few examples just to quickly flash these by, because I think they're interesting, in terms of where people seem to be suspending their normal sense of right and wrong. For example, would we in other circumstances ask the victims of violence what they were wearing? Would we do it here? Yeah, would we ask people who've been assaulted in any other system what they were wearing at the time of the assault, much as South Wales Police do here? Would we hold somebody responsible for their own injuries in the way that my PhD student recently found people do, just because they happen to have forgotten to wear a high-vis coat? So it seems in her research here, forgetting to wear protective equipment is worse than not wearing it. And people become responsible for their own injuries in these circumstances. So there's lots of places we can point at of people showing these strange double standards or becoming blind to the harms of motoring. And so we've spent quite a bit of time trying to get to the bottom of this. A few more places you can see it. We're all very familiar with the problems of media reporting and how media reporting constructs motor injuries and road violence as being something inevitable, much like the weather, something we can't control. But like the weather, if you're worried about it, the best thing you can do is put a coat and a hat on. And we've explained all of this kind of phenomenon through this notion of motonormativity, a shared, largely unconscious assumption that travel is and must continue to be primarily a car-based activity, that travel and cars are the same thing to people. And a couple of things pop out of this. So we've claimed that once people accept the idea that travel equals driving, you get these sort of secondary phenomena. So one is that people suspend their normal values in the way I've described, and the other is that they see harm as inevitable. And the third is that they struggle to imagine any change to the status quo. So we've measured this a few ways. We measured it originally a few years ago. Other people have picked this up and found the same thing. So these are data from IPPR, who did a replication of our work in the UK and found the same thing we did. They found people making special pleading or giving special exemptions when it comes to driving. So in their data here, it's fine if you're having to listen to loud music. Oh, sorry, no, I've got this wrong. It's fine if a car is making you breathe poisonous fumes, but not okay if the poisonous fumes come from a non-car system, and not okay if the noise comes from something that's not a car. So noise is a problem unless it comes from a car. Fumes are a problem unless they come from a car. It's not hard to measure people doing this kind of special pleading and overlooking the harms of motoring. Now, what we argued in that original work was that this is shaped by multiple aspects of a person's environment. So there you are in the middle of this diagram, growing up in the world around us, And there's lots of different elements of this environment that shape your motor normativity, shape this automatic, reflexive tendency to overlook the problems of motoring and to see it as inevitable. So we argue that there's social influences, this microsystem of your friends and family, giving children toy cars to play with, encouraging children to smash toy cars into things, and normalizing this stuff from the cradle. And then there's the social influences of the people we see around us every day. There's the physical world. If you've got two ways to travel and one of them's got a statue in the middle of it and one doesn't, that is sending quite an important physical signal about which mode of transport is more valued than the other. And all of this takes place within our culture, and our media, our advertising, our legal system, all of these things tend to reinforce the status quo. And one of the things we argued is that a lot of the time, all of these multiple environments will point in the same direction. So there you are, growing up in a typical UK environment. The people around you will be encouraging you to jump in a car and use it a lot. The streets will be encouraging you to jump in your car and use it. Certainly your streets will make driving more convenient than walking, because who gives way to whom? Our policy and our legislation also encourage you to jump in a car and use it. They certainly make that more convenient than getting in a bus, for example. And our cultural environment, the language you use, the media reporting, as I've already flashed up, all of these things encourage us to use cars, ignore the harms that come from that, and treat this as completely normal. So that was our claim off the first piece of work. And the big question, as with any claim, the question is, are we right? So this most recent piece of work, and I'm not going to correct your pronunciation of Marco's name, I think that was about right, and he'll have to turn up if he wants to make it even better. We decided to test this idea. So we crowdfunded, thanks to a bunch of people off Twitter and Marco's activities in Netherlands. We crowdfunded a little bit of money so we could pay people to do a survey in 3 countries. So we did the UK, the USA, and the Netherlands, with a view that that gives us 3 different environments, but not too different. 3 interestingly different environments where we might be able to measure the relative importance of people's surroundings for shaping this most normative tendency. And sure enough, here it is. So here's like the headline finding, if you like. You can see that this tendency towards motor normativity, this tendency to exhibit double standards and to make special allowances for the harms of motoring, was indeed lower in the Netherlands. Now, there's definitely overlap. You can see that there were people in the Netherlands who had high tendencies and people in America and Britain who had low tendencies, but the distributions have some separation there. The UK and the US are very, very similar sets of scores, and the Netherlands is somewhat lower on average. So that lends support to the idea that the environment is shaping people's perceptions of what's normal and proper. One of the things that we found that I thought was particularly interesting was we showed there's at least 2 separate processes going on. So it's not surprising that what people explicitly say, what they think about car and non-car travel, is a good predictor of their tendency to show pro-car biases. If you explicitly stand up and say, I think cars are amazing and I think nobody should cycle, it's not surprising you will show pro-car biases. So that's there. But what's then more interesting is how those 2 things there are shaped. And we found that there were several things going on. So if you look, for example, down the bottom left there, the blue boxes, those social influences seemed specifically to shape what people explicitly say, which in turn shapes their most normativity. If you look up at the top right, where we've got the peachy coloured boxes, like rural location and age, those things seemed to be predicting that people's motor normativity, their blind spots, but in a way that was completely independent of what people thought they thought. So it looks like this big picture stuff, like if you live out in the countryside, seems to be shaping people's perceptions in quite an unconscious kind of way, which is really interesting. And then the orange boxes, which country you live in and what the government policies are, or what the government policies are seen to be, were having separate effects on both of those. So asking someone which country they live in had an effect on what they think, what they explicitly say, and completely independently of that, it also had a separate effect on this more unconscious, automatic tendency to show biases towards motoring. So there's a lot going on, but it's nice, and I think pretty convincing evidence that it is your environment, it is your surroundings that in multiple different ways are shaping your perspectives of what's normal and shaping your perspectives about the extent to which motoring is desirable or undesirable or inevitable or whatever. The other thing, really quickly, that came out of this that in some ways I think is actually more interesting was what we found in terms of people's perceptions of what they think everybody else thinks. So there's a phenomenon which I was first put onto by Adrian Davis, who I've worked with in the past, and some of you might know, called pluralistic ignorance. So this is a phenomenon where people wrongly believe that their view is different to everybody else's. So this is the Wikipedia entry that you can read in your own time. The important bit is actually that bottom sentence in orange. People wrongly, for no good reason, just assume that the majority position must be a minority position. And this is a phenomenon that's been seen in various contexts, and sure enough, we saw it here. So let me give you a quick example. So I just move my window out of the way. One of the things we did in this most recent study was we measured every question in the same people. So, for example, we asked everybody, how important do you think it is that people can travel by car? And we got people to rate how important they thought that was. And the same people told us how important they thought it was that you can travel without a car. And because we had those two measurements from each person, you can simply subtract the second statement from the first statement and get a measure. So if those two statements, if car travel and non-car travel were equally important to somebody, then subtracting one from the other should give you a score of 0 if they were equally important. If people thought that being able to travel without a car was more important than being able to travel with a car, you'd get a negative number. And sure enough, look at those numbers. That's what we found. So the people, the 2,000 people we got data from, on average, were pretty clearly giving us negative scores here. They were saying that I believe it is more important to be able to travel without a car than to be able to travel with a car. We also asked exactly the same people, okay, what do you think your friends and family would say to those two questions? And we got these positive responses. Oh yeah, so I believe it's more important to travel without a car than with a car. Oh, my friends and family, oh no, they wouldn't think that. What, the average person in my area? No, they wouldn't think that. So there was this very clear disconnect between what people told us they thought about the importance of traveling without a car and what they believed everybody else thinks. So very clear pluralistic ignorance effect. Another facet of this, I'm not expecting everybody to immediately interpret this graph, but another facet that's visible on this graph, if you can very quickly look across the 5th row down, non-car travel, how much do you support it versus family and friends? You can see that across the 3 countries, 66, 64, and 70% of people assumed they were in the minority. Now, you can't have 66, 67%, 70% of people in a minority. That's just numerically impossible. So again, very clear evidence of how the majority of people are assuming that their support for being able to travel without a car is an unusual position. Now, interestingly, just really briefly, this tallies a little bit with some stuff we saw a few years ago, working with Bike is Best, where we asked some similar questions to people. Do you agree that Britain would be better if more people cycled? And we saw that there was very widespread agreement with that statement from the people we tested across the country. But similarly, they thought that their friends and the public would have a different view. So again, we saw pluralistic ignorance here. And some of you might have seen just a few days ago in the news, this work from the 89% Project, which found something quite similar in terms of climate action. So they found in this project, again, across multiple countries, that 89% of people on average were in support of greater climate action, but those same people assumed that was an unusual position. So they found something very similar in terms of climate that we found a few months ago in terms of non-car travel specifically. So this pluralistic ignorance thing is a real issue that we need to be thinking about. So what do we do? And I think there's two things that fall out of that most recent project. One is we need to think, well, if we want to change stuff, where's the best place to act? And the thing that I can't get away from in my own mind is if we're going to do actions to try and change travel or change attitudes, are we better dealing with individual people and trying to persuade people one at a time? Or are we better trying to do things at the outside of the environment and work from the outside in, making changes that will affect a lot of people all at once? If we could change the culture or the physical environment, you know, maybe move the statue into the middle of the road as opposed to the cycle track, that's going to change the behavior and the attitudes of a lot of people all at once. So we need to think, where's the best place to devote our energies in terms of making change? Is it the individual or is it the surroundings of multiple individuals? And the final thing is we've got to rethink consultation. Look at what we do when we want to do anything to our streetscape. If we're looking at, well, anything, we want to put a cycle lane in, we want to move a single parking space, we want to do anything at all, and we consult by saying, here's what we're thinking of doing, who's got an opinion? And we invite commentary from people who want to respond. Now, if you accept that the majority of people support change, but the majority of people think that is unusual, they are not going to respond. If everybody's thinking, well, I like the idea of a cycle lane, but I must be unusual, they're not going to respond. So we cannot carry on doing consultation by just allowing people to respond voluntarily and inviting comments, because that is going, that in the existence of pluralistic ignorance, that is just doomed to fail. We've got to go towards different methods like proper market research, proper opinion polling, representative polling, participatory value evaluation, things like this that genuinely capture the full range of what people think, not just inviting people to shout if they've got an opinion, because we know now that most people think they are unusual for wanting change to the status quo. Thank you very much. There's a link there. If anyone's not seen that, QR code takes you to the GCN video, which is a very good introduction to this motonormativity phenomenon. So if you ever want to persuade people, that video is a really useful starting point. Thank you very much.
Right, thank you, Ian. That was a really good run through, and yeah, the GCN video is a really good one. The GCN have done a number of good things recently on the advocacy line, and maybe we'll try and get the guy on on here to talk to us about how they got into it. There's a few good questions come up. I will start with a technical one. It's always a good one for any form of research like this. Is where did the sample come from? I think you said a 2,000 sample. That's 2,000 across the 3 countries.
Yeah, that's right. So we used an online recruiting platform. So it's called Prolific. It's essentially one of several platforms that has large numbers of people signed up willing to take part in surveys or take part in studies. So there's a certain amount of self-selectedness about it, but what we were able to do is at least check the demographics. And so we had a reasonable demographic mix, and the demographics look comparable across the 3 nations. So we're not pretending that this is necessarily a completely representative sample of the 3 countries, because that would be a very different effort. But grabbing something in the region of 600 to 800 people from each country and looking at double standards within those people, we were able to see what we saw. And a really important facet of this is that everybody answered everything. And that if you do your studies in a way where everybody answers everything and you're essentially comparing people to themselves, then you overcome a lot of issues of representativeness as well.
Right. So it's representative in age and gender and ethnicity, but there's some self-selection.
There'll definitely be some self-selection, but the really important thing in a sense is that within the bunch of people we had, because they all answered the questions about how important driving is and how important not driving is, the difference is within a given person. So you're not comparing apples and oranges, you're comparing the same person's view on driving and the same person's view on not driving, which gives you a bit more confidence.
So you had there's a question about explaining the concept of people thinking what they think. I think you explained that by putting up some of the questions and showing how they were phrased, and then people selected the answer. You had some one-way arrows between. This is somebody's question, between what they think and the blind spots. I guess so. There's a question there about causality. And how confident can you be about causality on some of those things?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So it's a statistical model. That was essentially a simplified version of a statistical model. So it's showing association. Now, obviously, there's no way you could. Well, establishing causality would actually be enormously difficult because we probably need to kidnap a load of children and raise them in different environments and evenly chosen in order to fully pick those things apart. So obviously there's some element of inference based on the fact that, if you live in a rural area, that is clearly associated with a difference in your motonormativity. If you live in the Netherlands, you'll show different levels to if you live in the UK. We're never in a position where we could fully prove causality in these circumstances, but it's pretty suggestive, I would argue.
Okay. H, you had a question. Is it? I don't know if it's the same as the statement you put in the questions.
Just refresh me what I said in the question.
It was about making a point about car abuse, which is I put a pavement parking and so forth, but
yeah, well, it's quite phenomenal. This is a local hospital, and over 50% of the land in the hospital is actually dedicated to car parking, and that's still not enough for the people. Yet the trains, with 24 trains an hour and 1.8 million boardings a year from the station, it's not well signposted. You have to pick your way through the car park. It's not sheltered, and it's only a 5-minute walk from the main entrance to the station. And yet nobody seems. There's a sort of it's an inertia issue. And I'd cite Borders Hospital as a particular place. When Peter Fuller had his say in how the roads were designed for Borders Hospital, he got it designed so that the buses and the ambulances had their own special back door. So the bus was going along the A7, didn't have to turn into the hospital and go round a cul-de-sac and come back out again, which cost them 8 minutes and usually meant an extra bus at £200,000 a year to run the service. Right. The bus services go straight through the hospital and they stop right outside the main entrance, and nobody uses the bus shelter. It's used for smokers. Everybody who wants to catch the bus sits in the WRVS tea room and has a cup of tea. And when the bus comes, they walk outside and get the bus because they've been in a nice, warm place with tea and coffee and cake.
So that's an interesting example of how you've got motonormativity in how the parking's designed, and then some clever engineer has designed an alternative that works.
You've got to break the inertia of being able to walk out the door. I've noticed
somebody has seen the problem. Okay, we'll have to go on to.
Well, just recently, they've actually put the bus departures on the main road, which is a 5-minute walk from the hospital. They've got them up in the main reception. And that's the sort of thing that makes people say, I can catch a bus.
Okay, thank you. And Bob, you have a question as well.
This is something that John Adams, my mentor, used to tell me a lot about, and it's he was referring to the fact that you get Sustrans used to do this quite a lot. That you ask people if they would like their kids to be able to cycle in more safety, if they would like less pollution, if they were worried about the climate crisis, etc., etc. And he then said, but it depends what question you ask them, because if you then ask them if they'd like another car, if they've got one already, or they'd like petrol prices to stay where they are and not go up, etc. In other words, pro-car questions, if you like, they would give different answers so that they would support the sustainable alternatives, active travel, blah, 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 but they would also support their own car use. And it's what I call the question, you know, which question do you ask them, and do they have a contradiction within themselves at that level? That's what I want to ask you.
Yeah, I think so, and I think that, you know, there's a lot of places you see this when you start looking for it. So you know, and it's a good example of the kind of double standards or blind spots that if you were to say to people, do you support children being safe? Obviously 99% of people are going to say yes to that. But if you were to then follow it with, okay, so you prepared not to drive through this town, or you prepared to drive very slowly, or then you're going to get a very different response. A lot of huffing and hawing and you blah, 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 blah. And so I think we do need to be really careful, because we're so attuned to give the wrong answer when cars are mentioned. We've got to start wider, I think. You know, I always come back to this idea that if we start by asking questions about cars or parking spaces or bike lanes or whatever, we trigger these reflexive tendencies to give answers that people don't truly believe. You know, people do not want to hurt children, but they will tell you that they do if you frame the question in terms of parking spaces. So we've got to be super careful, because we're dealing with a fundamentally culturally deep-seated blind spot that stops people giving the answer that I would argue they kind of do want to give. And I realize that this can sound quite paternalistic, but you know, ultimately nobody does want children to be killed in the street, but their actions speak differently if this topic is invoked.
The best example of that, asking the series of leading questions, is undoubtedly in Yes Minister. I think it's the example on the National Service episode. Yes. And Sir Humphrey gives...
I put that in the comments.
Oh. Somebody's heard that before. Yeah, if you're in doubt, go and look it up. It must be on iPlayer or something somewhere. It's absolutely brilliant, as is all of Yes Minister. I'm showing my age, but there we go. There's another question related to the questions from Matthew Phillips, which is, are people answering to make themselves look good, i.e. caring about non-car travel, but then they're more honest about their own opinion when they're when they're talking about what other people are thinking? So it's a concern about how they're answering the questions.
I'd kind of hope that there's not that sort of self-presentation bias going on. You know, you've got people answering completely anonymously, and critically they answered all of the questions in random order. Everyone got questions in a completely different random order. So for some people, the very first question would have been, do you think it's important to be able to travel without a car? And for some people, the very first question might have been, you know, what do you think your neighbours reckon about car travel? So everything was completely muddled up. It was completely anonymous. And I think, you know, we can never know for sure, but I think we set it up in such a way that we got the best chance of seeing what people really think, hopefully without that presentation bias that you might get if you were doing this face-to-face or people weren't anonymous.
Great. And then there's you might well have seen, Ian, the policy announced a couple of days ago about the life sentences for cyclists who kill.
Yes.
Is that an example of motonormativity?
Oh, yes, but there's probably other things going on as well there. I think there's also some outgrouping and things of that sort. The thing that kept going through my head all weekend when I was thinking about that, and I did stick it on Blue Sky yesterday, is the analogy that I keep thinking is it's like saying we're going to clamp down on female violence. And just like the conversations I was having last week, you go, well, because people kept coming back saying, "Are you telling me that cyclists never hurt anyone?" Blah blah, and there was a lot. And it's like if we were to say, the government said we're going to have a clamp down on women's violence, you'd say, yeah, well, yes, women do hurt people from time to time, but what a weird thing to start with. What a weird thing to pick a marginalized group who fundamentally are nearly 99% of the time the victims of violence.
Yes.
That's where you're going to start your clamp down. And I think that's actually quite a strong analogy. The parallels are not far off.
Yeah. Well, that's fair.
You also get asked what we're wearing when we're victims of crime. That's another thing that happens.
Absolutely.
That's right. It's less motonormativity. It's cyclist abnormativity. It's the outgrouping. As you say, you've got to reverse the order of it. It's the opposite. It's the double opposite of the problem. I was going to ask one question. I can't add it to the Q&A, but now's a good time for it. Are there other areas in which this kind of normativity occurs, which I'm sure there are, but in the same kind of harmful way?
Yeah, and we were very explicit in our first paper that we've not invented the notion of normativity, and there's other forms of. And the one that we were particularly thinking of at the time was heteronormativity, this assumption that, well, everyone knows that a couple is a man and a woman, but then it's what falls out from that. So if somebody just automatically, reflexively assumes that couple equals man plus woman, then that's when you get things like schools who give forms that say mother's name, father's name. And if you're a same-sex couple, you are not accommodated because of this person's automatic assumptions about what couples look like. And so it was that, there's lots of other versions of this, and I'm pretty sure you could talk about probably anthronormativity, assuming, a bit like, the book Invisible Women would be another example of that. I guess anthronormativity would probably be the word, wouldn't it? This automatic unthinking that male needs are normal needs, that what I need as a man is what everybody clearly needs, is what disadvantages women. So there's loads of versions of this normativity, and this is just, I think, a particularly important one.
Yes. Have you got me thinking? I wonder if there's a holiday normativity in that a holiday now involves a jet flight somewhere, which is destructive to the environment and sets a expense benchmark for everybody. Just like owning a big flash car sets an expense benchmark. Mark, you've got a question. And we'll round it up there because we've got to fit Ranty.
I mean, as a former research psychologist, I could have been doing what Ian's. I keep thinking I should have stuck to my guns and done it all. So I'm always looking at what Ian does and thinking I could have been there. But I think this, and I, not formally, but this idea of kidnapping children and raising them, as I said in the chat, The Dispossessed by Ursula Le Guin is about how you need 3 generations to get a society that is fully denormatized or whatever it is. But the question is important, and I think this is true. So immigration is another issue where people have normative things about asylum seekers and immigrants and how you phrase the question. It's all about outgroups, and I think this is yes, your anonymous questions are important, but when you go to public meetings and somebody doesn't want to say a question, that's when the outgrouping and the normativity comes in, because people think that they're in a minority, so they don't support the LTN or whatever the scheme that's there, and the one shouty person who is the normative person wins the day because they're normative.
Exactly, 100%, and that's exactly what I was picturing. Maybe I didn't articulate it very well, but that's exactly what I was picturing when I was saying the problem with consultation. And actually, really interestingly, talking to Kia Wilson from Streets Blog in New York a couple of days ago, and she made she was talking about exactly that situation. And actually, added something even more interesting on top, which was who's got time to go to public consultations? That systematically disadvantages certain people if that's where your decision making is happening, because there are predictable elements of society who don't have the luxury of being able to pop in and share their views, even if they thought that everyone was going to listen to them. So yeah, the consultation process is flawed in so many ways. And if there's one thing I would love, the change I would most like to see in the world is a move away from the way we do consultation.
We had an outdoor events consultation last night, which was beer normative, for want of a better word.
Well, there's yeah, actually, that might be exclusive to certain groups. So I don't know. You have to balance that up with a fruit juice normative one, and getting the kids in. They're excluded from just about every consultation. Right, that was a really terrific session, Ian. Thank you very much. There's lots of other questions in the chat that we don't have time to do, but we'll provide you lots of future research topics, so they're worth a look. Please stay on for Mark's presentation coming right up. Away you go, Mark. Got your slides up.
Sorry, I couldn't unmute myself.
You're unmuted now. Loud and clear.
Let's try again, shall we? Are you seeing the first screen?
Yes, but I'm seeing the menu bars a second ago. Oh, that's better.
Excellent. Right, we're there. Sorry, I was on a laptop and my connection was going weird. So let's try it again. So I'm going to look at Dutch hills. And by Dutch hills, I mean bridges. Very good at the beginning of the month. Got away for a week over to the east of the Netherlands, which actually is quite hilly for those that don't know it. So like actual real hills, which make your legs hurt. But let's look at a few bridges. So a few little maps here as we go through, looking at a few bridges. So here is the Horseshoe Crossing in Arnhem South, 90 metres long, goes over the N225, which is like a regional road, local kind of flow road. But it's actually part of the F325 Arnhem to Nijmegen fast cycle route, which took us about an hour, stopping to take photos and not being amazingly fast. But that's quite an interesting project, which I'll pick up again in just a second. So here it is. Not much of a hill to get there, I'd admit, but it's a hill nonetheless. Quite an attractive little bridge there. You can see the covered walkway in the distance. That's the pedestrian side, and that gets people between some bus interchanges. The road you see in the foreground is actually a little busway. There's trolley buses in Arnhem. So as well as being a bridge for this fast cycle route, it's also an interchange for bus passengers. So that was quite nice. Let's go a bit further out of Nijmegen now, and we're going to look at the, now my pronunciation is going to be terrible, it's the Wertlock complex, 125 metres long. It's a lock between the Marswal Canal and the River Wye itself, the big river you can see curling at the top of the map there. And here we are, so slightly different, probably a bit higher than before, a pair of with flow cycle tracks. You can walk across it if you're that far out, but it's quite a long way from civilization. Lifting bridge, there's you can see on the left-hand side, there is the lock gates over here, but it's a hill to get up to. It requires a bit of puff and effort to get over the top of this one. Let's go a little bit further out again. This is the Tacitus Bridge, 270 meters long, but actually if you include the approach roads and the approach ramps, it's 1 kilometer long. And this is the A50 motorway over the River Wye again. And quite interestingly, this duplicates an older and refurbished bridge. So let's have a look at the photo. So you can see the two, the central and the right-hand pillar on the screen. That's the original bridge, which was restored. When this was expanded, the third pillar to the left, essentially building two bridges stuck together. The refurbishment included the addition of a cycle track on the left-hand side, and looks fairly flat there. That was taken pretty much at the middle. If I go to the next one, we're quite a long way above the river there. It has to be quite a long way above the river because of the size of the barges and boats that go along the river there, which is one of the main transport corridors in that part of the Netherlands for shipping. So yes, now that really was a Dutch hill to get to the top of. And if anyone picked up on LinkedIn, I did a quick little video from there a few weeks back. I panned around, and it was very obviously a hill. And you can just see in the distance, it dives down to the north side. Okay, let's, we're still flying around Nijmegen here. This is a bit closer to the city. This is the Snelbinder and Spoorbrug, which is essentially the bind quickly, the connect quickly bridge, which was now part of the Nijmegen railway bridge. 700 meters long. The main arch truss is 220 meters long, but this is a monster, 2 kilometers, including the approach viaducts for cycling. 2 kilometer structure here. And this carries the F325 fast cycle route as it hits the town of the city of Nijmegen. There is actually a parallel route for the F325 which goes across the road bridge, but this is the more scenic way in. So this is at the kind of near the Nijmegen Lent station, which is to the north of the river, and you can see that the viaducts are started. We're heading up towards the railway here. This is all structure. A bit further on, we're kind of just starting to cross one of the subsidiary river channels, and you can see very clearly here, this is bolted onto the side of the railway structure, and there is a train coming out of Nijmegen just to demonstrate that. The very, very central section is also for walking. It's got dedicated walking routes for those that want to walk that distance. Again, we're quite a long way out of the city here, but people are using it to get to the parkland and the river itself. You can just see in the distance the main arch of the railway and a smaller arch to the left. We'll go a bit closer. Here is the smaller archer to the left, which is still a monster. Anybody that knows London might know Hungerford Bridge, which has a pair of pedestrian footbridges added to the main structure. This is very, very similar. It's got foundations below which are kind of extended from the railway bridge, and then the top of this arch is attached to the side of the bridge itself. Quite an amazing piece of engineering here. And it takes quite a bit of puff to get to the top. Once you get up and over, this is heading down into Nijmegen. The viaduct starts again, and you start to peel away from the railway corridor down into the city proper. So yeah, 2,000 meters of the viaduct, the main bridge, and then back down again the other side. This is quite a big scale for cycling. Okay, and then we're going to round off with probably my favourite Dutch hill, the Daphne Shippers Bridge, who's a local athlete to the area where this was built. 170 meters long. There's the eastern ramp, which we'll have a look at in a second, which is 230 meters long, and it's integrated with a rebuilt school. Quite an important structure. This connects the expanded neighbourhood to the west of the Amsterdam-Rhine Canal, which you can see just here. The A2 motorway, you can just see here on the left, that's been buried in a big tunnel. So huge development going on in the area. It's been going for years. It'll probably carry on for a few more years, but this is a really important link. So here's a bridge. Again, it's pretty high up because it has to get over a canal, which is used for shipping. To the right-hand side of the screen is Utrecht, as people might know it, the city itself. So the left is the urban expansion. Cycle track running along the river here. To get to the bridge on the left-hand side, on the western side, you actually cycle up through some local streets to get you up to bridge level. But this is the interesting bit. This is the bit everybody likes to see. So we're on the bridge looking down towards the Utrecht side, the eastern side, and we start to go down a ramp. And then we hit a corner, and we've got this lovely big sinuous ramp that takes us around. Have a look at the guy on the ramp just here. Look at the angle that he's starting to turn at. And there he goes round the corner, going pretty quickly down to street level on this side. What's really interesting is this is the school that it's integrated with. You can see people up on the top here. That's on the top of the ramp, literally on the roof of the school. They needed a new school, They needed a bridge to get over to the western side. They put the whole thing together to make it work. What a fantastic piece of engineering. And as we hit the Utrecht side properly, just to give an indication of how this integrates with the street network, you've got dedicated cycle crossings here, goes into residential streets, and then you can carry on off into the city centre. Yes, I think out of all the Dutch hills so far, that's probably my favourite. And that's it for me this time.
Brilliant. Any quick comments on what Mark has shown us? I mean, I've got to be impressed by the space that they've built, found, engineered, but you always are, aren't you? Envious. Lovely red tarmac, and then space for pedestrians as well. Ah, sigh. Tim, you have a question?
Lovely holiday snaps, Mark. Thank you. I asked earlier about floating bus stops and that House of Lords debate. My understanding was that the vote was lost, and we don't have to rip out every floating bus stop in the country. But I'm a little bit nervous because one of my fellow ride leaders was tasked in Leicester to go and find all the 203 bus stops that we have that are adjoin cycleways just recently. So what's the state of play?
Would you like a quick explainer? I can give a quick explanation.
If you can do it in a couple of minutes.
I'll do my best. The buses bill is going through Parliament, which is the Labour's flagship bill on franchising bus services. The National Federation for the Blind and Guide Dogs for the Blind, who are the more opposed to floating bus stops groups, decided they would try with Richard Holmes to introduce a clause in there to ban floating bus stops. The government responded by proposing a less draconian clause. So there are two clauses, 30 and 31, or 31 and 32, I can't remember. One is bus stops in general, which the Secretary of State is recommended to write some guidance. This was carried. Secretary of State is recommended to write some guidance, but with a fairly vague thing. The clause on floating bus stops, there was two. There was a draconian, no floating bus stops must be put in ever, and they must all be removed immediately. That was defeated by only 2 votes, but it was defeated. The government's proposal, which was put by David Blunkett, was the Secretary of State must produce guidance within 3 months of the passing of this bill on how to do floating bus stops correctly. So that is, unless the House of Commons changes it, which is always possible, that is now written in the bill, that the guidance must be produced within 3 months. And the third clause in this suite is that every local authority in the country has to reply to the Secretary of State or the DFT what they've been doing based on the advice that the DFT have put out. So that's your friend. They're preempting, it hasn't become law yet, they're preempting what they'll be asked to do by the DFT and presumably ATE. What have you been doing about floating bus stops? How have you been taking the government's guidance? I can't say very much, but somebody very dear to this place has got a plan. And I will leave it as vague as that, but you can probably read between the lines. A plan for how to deal with this. It's not anything like as bad as it could be. I would just say there is one thing, which is go and read the debate. Go and read the debate in Hansard, which I think was the 2nd of April, because the nuance doesn't come over in there, and there's various things flying around about what may or may not have been said. The one thing that has been sacrificed, however, is bus stop borders. That's where you get off straight onto a cycle track. So there's no floatingness. You're straight in the cycle track. The minister, Peter Hendy, essentially said, I am asking, I can't stop councils doing them, but I am asking councils to voluntarily stop doing them before we tell them to stop doing them, because we haven't worked out a way of telling them how to stop doing them. So bus stop borders have effectively been sacrificed in order to get floating bus stops kept, or in order to keep floating bus stops. Is that clear?
Yep. I think so. Thanks very much. And we're really out of time there. So thanks very much for that
Susie's
summary.
question, It specifically is floating bus stops with cycle tracks. That's written into the legislation. Only cycle tracks. If you cross a road with cars on it to get to a bus stop, no legislation, no guidance. You can do what you like on those.
Oh, well,
so talk about motonormativity again. You know.
Yes, yes. You know, put a motorway in there. That's fine.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Great. Well, thanks very much for that, Mark. Thank you to the other Mark for that interesting talk about bridges, which turn out to be hills in the Netherlands. And thanks particularly to Ian Walker for talking us through Motonormativity and your research there and giving us links to the GCN video and, of course, your seminal second paper on the topic, which I hope we've all read or will go and read. Next week we have, wrong page, Isabel McCagg and Mark Hardy from the Applied Information Group, who are going to be talking about the inclusive wayfinding toolkit that they've been developing as a national solution for active travel wayfinding with funding from UKRI, which is very interesting, and we all like a bit of signposting, so please come along and find out the right way to do it next week here at this very